So to say I had some elaborate algorithm that told me when the day I could retire, or not retire, but quit my job, I didn't have that. But what I did do was I put the pieces in place and I built the machine while I was working my 9 to 5. And to be quite honest, and like, this is just like honesty. It's not necessarily the right thing to do. I'm not super proud of it, but I was essentially, before I left my company I was working for, I was running a full-fledged house flipping business from my 9 to 5 job. Like I was doing my job and I was getting everything done and I was doing fine. Everyone that I worked for was very happy with me, but man, was I running a machine outside of there.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else. With your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grinzik. With me, as always, is John Cohen. How's it going, bud?
Oh, we were hanging in there. I was actually just underwriting a real off-market deal, directly sourced to seller. I was just going through the financials, and we're actually it's shaking out. You know, I'm gonna put an offer in on it, but I know one of the larger brokers and a good friend of ours is trying to track this guy down to sell. So it'll be interesting if we can put it under contract before they get their hands on it. So we'll see what happens.
Race to the finish line.
Exactly.
It's interesting. We don't often get a lot of those.
Mm-hmm. So this is a true one. This is not these, this is real. This was, drummed up, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's jump into today's episode. We got a really great guest on today. I think he's going to have a lot of interesting insights, some good experiences, and, some really interesting conversations. So with that being said, Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. I'm excited about doing this.
You got it. So you want to kick things off, just a few minutes on you, your background, and what you're doing?
Yeah, totally. So Mike Simmons, born and raised in Michigan, so Midwest guy, which is cool for pricing of houses. It makes a little more easy to jump in the mix. But I was born, in a blue collar situation. My family worked for automotive, strictly union, and that was sort of the goal for me growing up, is that I'm going to, get a job at a company with a union and be there for 35 years and retire and kind of go that route. And I followed that path early on. I went to high school, obviously graduated, got a job right out of high school at a union company, and decided in all my wisdom and brilliance that I didn't need college. So I just went in there and said, I'm going to retire from here. Education's not going to help me in this particular company. So I did that for a while. It was UPS, great company. But unfortunately, I wrecked my back at age 24, wrecked it. Couldn't get out of the bed without a chiropractor appointment 3 times a week. And so I just said, this isn't working. I got to go somewhere else. Jumped into the automotive industry, started working for a company that I loved. And I thought, okay, here we go. I found my home for the rest of my life. Saw no need to go to college still. Long story short, automotive industry hit a snag around 2000, and it just wasn't in the cards for me to probably be there the rest of my life. And said, finally, it dawned on me I need an education because I really wasn't that sellable in my industry. I just didn't have that much experience, and I had no education. So went back, got my degree, started working in the white collar, kind of a corporate track. I knew what I wanted, got in with an international, huge billions of dollar company. Again, third time in my life, I thought, this is it. I kind of found my home. I have an education. I have a track. I can see what's ahead of me. I know the jobs that I ultimately want to get before I retire. And after working there for 4 or 5 years, the people who held the jobs that I wanted, they were miserable. They hated their life. They hated their wife. They hated their kids. They hated their job. They hated everything about existence. And I thought, this is really what I'm trying to go. This is what I'm trying to be as these guys. That sucks. So I started looking around, what else, what can I do with the money that I have? Or how do I retire at least early so I don't have to live this life for the next 20 years? And hit real estate as I was Googling. And really, I went towards stocks first, like stock trading and the stock market, and just hated it. I don't have the patience for it. But I found real estate, and it was exciting. It really kind of stirred something inside of me. Started going down that track, learning, going to seminars, reading books, and finally bought my first property in 2008. Flipped it, made tons of mistakes, but it ended up at the end of the day. Now, this is Michigan market, right? So it's not going to blow anybody away with the numbers. But back in 2008, when everything kind of crashed, hit rock bottom, I bought a house for $40,000, put about 15 into it, sold it for about 75, and made about 15 once the dust settled. So for me, it was I didn't have 15,000 before I started that, right? And for my wife too, it was holy crap. And I was addicted. It was literally, it it's the equivalent of someone saying, hey, little kid, like, here's some drugs. What do you think? It's like, oh, I love it. I want more. Like, I couldn't get enough. I was insatiable. It was like a drug for me. And I just started going crazy. And I stayed with my 9-to-5 job for about 4 years before I made the jump and went full-time into real estate, mostly because my wife just honestly wanted that. She needed to know it was going to be okay. So I had to put a bunch of money in the bank, like a big cushion, big runway. And when I finally did it, like within 3 or 4 months, she's like, oh yeah, you're never going back. This is killer. So that's how I started. Made tons of mistakes. My company really didn't take off. Once I started investing 2008, it was probably about 6 years before my company really turned the corner and started taking off. So I bumbled around for a while, made a ton of mistakes, but I also learned a lot. And once I turned it around, I was able to kind of zero in on what is it that other people are doing that I'm not doing? How are they seeing the success that I want and I'm not? And once I kind of zeroed in and had those conversations, it was game on for me.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting because 2 episodes ago, we spoke to Ryan Daigle, who's just started the process of quitting his time doing this full time, and very similar to you, created a runway and built it up. Can you talk a little bit through more of that process of like, how did you look at it? Like, how did you budget for creating like a runway or expenses or projecting out what you could make? Like, how was that whole process for you, and what ultimately got you to that point where you're like, okay, let's do this thing?
Yeah. So I'm a super simple guy. If there's one thing I've learned in the last 13 years of investing in real estate, being an entrepreneur, is I'm not a detail guy. Like, I need people around me that like dot I's and cross T's. I'm not that guy. So to say I had some elaborate algorithm that told me when the day I could retire, or not retire, but quit my job, I didn't have that. But what I did do was I put the pieces in place and I built the machine while I was working my 9-to-5. And to be quite honest, and like, this is just like honesty, it's not necessarily the right thing to do. I'm not super proud of it, but I was essentially, before I left my company I was working for, I was running a full-fledged house flipping business from my 9-to-5 job. Like, I was doing my job and I was getting everything done and I was doing fine. Everyone that I worked for was very happy with me, but man, was I running a machine outside of there. So what I did though, and what kind of made my wife feel good, was in the first probably 3.5 years or so, I just reinvested all the money. I didn't really take any profits, right? So I think sometimes you have to sacrifice a little to have, the benefit down the road. So I reinvested my profits in marketing and personnel and things like that. So that last 6 months that I was at my job, I just told my wife, listen, you can see the money that's coming in. Obviously you can't see it, but here it is, right? Like, it's coming in, I'm just reinvesting it. But if I can put aside 1 year's salary in the bank, set it aside, we don't touch it for anything, it doesn't get reinvested, just sits there. 8 months from now, if I am not generating as much or more than I am currently in my 9-to-5, it gives me 4 months to go out and find another job. The market was actually pretty strong in the automotive industry at the time. Then I'll go back and get a job, right? So it's like no harm, no foul, and no risk. And she's like, that's fair. Put the money aside. 8 months later, we'll have that discussion. And if it looks like it just isn't happening, you go back into the job market and we're back where we are now. And I agreed. I said, fine. That's what I said. 3 months into it, she's like, oh yeah. Because I had already got another year's salary in the bank by that point. So, it was clear that I wasn't going to have to go back. And that's how I made the decision. Very simple, very straightforward, not a lot of formulas. But I had also had like 4 years leading up to that of we could see growth and we could see the progression. So it wasn't like I discovered real estate and then 2 days later I said, I want to quit my job, right? That would have never probably happened. I would have done it because risk doesn't scare me. I mean, I don't really want to jump out of a plane, honestly, but like risking money, I'm fearless. I'm good as long as I feel like I have it's an educated guess or educated, calculated risk that I'm taking.
Mm-hmm. So I talk about that all the time because people say, when did you quit your job? And it's, so I didn't have a salary-based job. I was always a commission-based. I've never got a paycheck in my life on a consistent 2-week W-2. It's never happened to me. So I've always been on that spirit, but I just work backwards, right? If I knew I needed 30 grand to live, it's like, okay, well, if I have 60 in the bank or if I have 35 in the bank, I could fuck something up for a year.
Yeah.
And you can go back and figure it out, especially if you're a W-2 guy or you have a full-time job like that, finding a job could be a little bit harder pending market conditions.
Yep.
If you're an eat what you would kill guy, well, I can get a job anywhere. So I knew if I had a year, now I waited for 2. I wanted 2 because I didn't want to go back to work for anybody else. But, I also cut my expenses, right? I moved back down, I was living with my parents. And so it was a lot easier, but I tell people all the time, I am not very similar, right? I don't get bored down by the details. There's no sexy spreadsheet to figure out when you can do real estate or not, at least in my opinion. Right now, I know there are people out there that probably got colors and formulas and if-then statements and shit like that. And I get it, but
exactly.
At the end of the day, what do you spend? What do you earn?
Yeah.
If you don't earn anything, what can you, how long can you go? That's what I tell people all the time. Work backwards, right? What do you feel comfortable with? Where if you have a significant other, whoever it may be, girlfriend, wife, husband, whatever, if they're not working or they, make sure you have enough to support whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And then you can figure it out. But I agree. I'm on the same page when it comes to that stuff. It's just, it ain't a sexy way to look at it, but it's just the truth behind it.
Yeah. I mean, for some of us, like I said, if I was a single guy, I would have jumped in probably the first 6 months that I was involved, just because I don't care. Like, I'll figure it out. Like I never had that fear of like, oh my gosh, what if I lose everything? I don't really have that fear, but I also have to go home and like, I have someone that I have to kind of coexist with a little bit. So, but it was fine. It was kind of good. I mean, sometimes having that governor, it kind of holds you from making catastrophic mistakes. But to be honest, I've never said this before because I did save that year's salary, but the last chunk of it was like, we were getting ready to close. Like, it was going to close in a few weeks. And I'm like, F it, I'm gone now. Like, I know it's coming. I'll get it. Right. It wasn't technically in the bank, but it was like, as far as I was concerned, it was there. And she was like, just do it. Like, you're chomping at the bit. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what you said early on when you left that you made a ton of mistakes, took you a little bit of while to kind of figure out what would make you successful. What are those things that you were messing up, or what did you learn during that time period that helped you course correct?
Yeah. Oh man, it's so many mistakes. So just to be clear, so everyone who's listening, I started off as a house flipper. I flipped houses for the first 5.5 years, all I did. And then I switched my model over to wholesaling, and I'm more of a wholesaler now. I probably am like 75-25 wholesale to flipping. And I can talk about why I did that, but to answer your question, mistakes I made, one of the biggest, I made a lot of mistakes, but the three big ones, like there's three major mistakes and three things, by the way, that once I addressed them and fixed them, my company hockey sticked. Like, the growth was just like straight up. Number one, I had no process. I had no system. Every time I bought a house or got a house under contract, it was like, go to Home Depot. Like, what tile do we want? Like, what color should we paint this house? And it was ridiculous. Like, you can't scale up a business and treat every single one like a snowflake. Like, there is a little bit of a system and a process that you need to follow for economy of scale, to be able to train anybody. Like, you just can't make it a new adventure every time. And I was making it a new adventure every time. So I wasn't saving money in terms of like buying things in bulk and stuff like that. So no systems, no processes. I was resistant to hire people early on for a couple of reasons. Practically speaking, I didn't feel like I was generating enough revenue to pay somebody. Like, I just don't have the money to pay them. I need to be able to use this money to invest for other things for the company. And so my thought process was, and because, by the way, guys, I had no like entrepreneurs in my family. Nobody in my family was running companies for me to go, hey, Uncle Bob, how do you hire? Like, what's the process? So I had to figure this stuff out. And I thought, you know what? Only big companies really hire employees. I'm not a big company, so I don't really think I can hire anybody. But then I knew intuitively, I just knew I would never become that company unless I got help. There just wasn't enough time in the day. And I don't care how efficient you are, how much you get done in a day. Like, oh, I only sleep 4 hours. I get up at 5 a.m. Like, okay, but there's still only a certain amount of time. And I wasn't able to get things done. So not hiring soon enough was a huge thing. And not tracking numbers. Like, when I was flipping houses, and you guys know, you're doing real estate, you have money that's out and you have money that's in your bank and you have stuff that's committed and you have stuff coming back. And there's always this churn going on. And if you don't have control of your cash flow and you don't know like truly how much money you're making and profiting and how much you're spending, and I didn't, it was just like money was coming and going. I knew I was buying and selling houses. I had no idea what my numbers were. So I didn't even know. To your point, John, in my own company, I think it's important, if you want to get somewhere, reverse engineer it. Figure out where you want to be and what is it going to take to get there, right? So if I'm spending whatever money on marketing and I'm doing these efforts and I make $1 million and I want to make $10 million, I have to kind of 10x everything I'm doing, right? But if you don't even have that baseline, you can't do that. So I didn't know my baseline. I didn't know if I was making money. Matter of fact, one year, my CPA called me. This was right after I went full time. It's so embarrassing, but my CPA called me. It was like, March. So we were kind of creeping up toward the deadline. and he's like, hey, I'm just going through your stuff here. Like, can you tell me, because at the time I was flipping and wholesaling. He said, can you tell me how many properties you took ownership of this year? And he goes, I don't mean like assigned. Like if you took title even for an hour, like how many did you take title to this year? And I didn't know. And worse, I had nowhere to go to figure it out. I just didn't have those. I don't know. I was just turning and burning. I wasn't keeping track of anything. So I had to like call the title companies I worked with. Like it was embarrassing and stupid. And I had to go around and ask people questions that I should have known. But that was a big wake up call for me. And so once I started tracking basic numbers, everything changed, because not only did I know where I was, but I also knew what I needed to do to 2x or 4x or 10x my company, which was huge. And probably the biggest thing that I can't say I did this wrong, but it was a piece that was missing for so long and I didn't know any better. I was so resistant to pay for coaching, to go to anything that was paid, to spend a dime to learn anything, because I thought Google was invented. So if Google is invented, I can find anything I need and it's just there. And while that might be true, it's not curated, and there's a lot of BS on Google. Like there's a lot of crap on Google that isn't true, and stuff that will mislead you if you don't know what you don't know. So when I started putting myself in rooms and surrounding myself with higher caliber of people and a higher caliber of business people specifically, and I was asking them questions about their business and trying to understand, how did you get from where I am to where you are? What did you do right, which is important, but what did you do wrong? Like what seemed like a good idea and it just blew up, and it's probably not a smart thing for someone else to do. So when I started being around those kind of people, something clicked. And it's like people say hindsight's 20/20, right? Well, if I can use your hindsight as my foresight and say, what did you do right and wrong? Like, tell me what happened. And if you had the benefit of hindsight when you started, like, imagine, right? So if you can give me your hindsight and I just use it as my foresight, you can do so much faster. And once I kind of harnessed that philosophy and said, I'm just going to stand on the shoulders of other people, I don't need to be creative, I need to be able to reproduce what I know already works, everything changed for me. I realized that hiring wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity if I wanted to grow and I wanted to take myself out of, by the way, some of the crap you do in your company, it's below your pay grade. It's not demeaning and it's not, you're too good for it. But as an owner, it's not what you should be spending your time on. You should hire out a lot of stuff that you're probably doing now if you're a one-man band. So once I realized that, and I realized I needed to track numbers, right? That's a great concept, but what numbers do you track, right? That was also important, to see somebody else's numbers and go, oh, I see why. Okay, now I understand why you're tracking those numbers. That's important. And then creating systems and processes is important for economies of scale. It's important for like spending, but it's also important when you start hiring. If everything's in your head, what the hell are they supposed to do? How are they going to figure that out, what you want to do if it's all in your head? So you have to put this stuff down somewhere, a starting point of how you can, because when I hired people, what I did was, to use like a football analogy, I would say, listen, guys, we're on the 5-yard line. You see that goal line 95 yards away? You see it? Go there, get there with the ball. And I don't need to know the details. Just go, right? You can't train people like that. That defeats people. And so I was hiring people and I was burning them out because I was just pushing and I was paying them and I was willing to pay them, to your point, John, commission. Like you go kill, you can, like I'll feed you like crazy, but I wasn't giving them the tools to be successful. I was just saying, go, right? And my point was, like, early on, I was wrong, but my philosophy was, you're a sales guy, go sell, like go, right? But I wasn't giving them any help with talk tracks. And I was pulling people out of other industries, for the record. Like, they weren't real estate people. And there's nuances. There's certain things that you might need to know before you go into that appointment. A salesperson is unique because a good salesperson, I don't think, needs to know everything about real estate. They need to know a number. They need some talk tracks. They need some basic information. But other people you hire, transaction coordinators, like people answering your phones for, like, they need some information, right? So they can be successful. And so once I learned to create those systems, and by the way, another mistake I made, my systems that I was creating early on were like the Bible. Like, they were like thick, like encyclopedias. And that's stupid, for one thing. Nobody's going to look at that every single day. And two, by the time you finish it, it's obsolete. And a company that's scaling and growing, like, you change your process, things change in that amount of time. So we create more bullet point process now. And so people can kind of like checklist type stuff. But those are the big things that I was doing wrong, man. And I was just like, I didn't even use paperwork. When I started flipping houses and I was bringing on private investors, like, I brought on the first investor I ever brought on, like, he gave me like 80 grand and we didn't have any paperwork. Now that's shame on him because that's his money, but really that's just bad practice for you as the investor too. Like, that's just bad practice. But stuff like that. I just learned to clean up my operation a little bit, because if you say to someone, hey, I want to borrow money from you, and they're like, cool, like, what's the process? You go, you just wire me money. Like, no, that's not going to happen, right? The first guy did it, but that was on him. It was dumb, but it didn't help me when I went to the second guy and they're like, well, what is your process? Let me see your docs. I'm like, docs? I don't know. Like, can you just wire it to me? And he's like, no, I can't. So I had to learn to clean up and get a little more professional.
I hear you. No, I think you covered on a ton of things, and you started going where I wanted to go of like, I think there's always got to be a balance in systems of, especially as you start to hire people and delegate, of like rigidity versus fluidity. And I'm curious how you find that middle ground. I know you started talking about it, but like, how do you balance between not giving somebody too much guidance and somebody not enough? Is it on a person by person basis? Is it on like a hierarchy scale? Like the lower down, the more there is, the higher up, the less? Like, how do you structure that?
Oh, you mean like workload specifically?
No, I'm just saying like the systems and the processes, because
Okay.
Some skills and jobs obviously require
Yeah.
a certain amount of creativity, and some are very repeatable. So how do you?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. It really depends on the job that I hired them for, right? Sales guys have way less structure in terms of like checklists and like, this is what you do and how you do it. I really know I am a barely passable sales guy in my company. Like, I did it for a while. And when I hired an actual like real salesperson who that is their superpower, I tripled my sales like almost overnight, because they were so much better than me. And I didn't even know I was so bad. So for me to handcuff a sales guy with a process and like a script, I'm going to cut him off at the knees. Like, he or she will do so much better if they just don't follow my lead, because I'm not a great salesperson. But they need some, I think in the beginning, even salespeople need some bumpers a little bit. So they kind of understand like, this is what we're like, they need a big picture, right? I think a lot of times if you explain the big picture to them, you give them a target, you explain to them how to come up with that target number, and sort of give them some parameters and just let them go and say, hey, I'll just be you and make the decision, and we'll figure it out. If you make a mistake or something, we'll fix it. We'll correct it. I'll back you up, and I'll just kind of talk you through it. It'll be lessons learned. You'll go so much faster than scripting them. Now, another position in my company is transaction manager. Okay. Transaction coordinator is really what we call them. They're in charge of taking the purchase agreements from between us and the seller, and taking the assignment contracts between us and the buyer, bringing those together, checking them, getting them to the title company, getting all the paperwork the title company needs, like docs, LLC docs and death certificates and all the stuff you need to close. Like, that job needs a pretty specific checklist of things they need to make sure they don't forget. And it's pretty scripted, because it's not a creative job. It's a very much an admin job, but there's a lot of moving parts. So they have to be like, I tried to do that job on my company because we had someone who was really, really good at that job. They left. We had like 20 deals going on, and I had to jump in and do it. We literally didn't close a deal for 2 months. And there were deals that should have closed. Like, I choked our business to a grinding halt because I'm so bad at details, and I was trying to do other things. And so that job needs a lot of attention to detail. So we have very specific instructions, like literally a checklist, like this, then do this, then do this, then do this, and how to handle situations. Sales guys are the other end of the spectrum. And then there's somebody in my company who's called a dispositions manager. And for those of the folks that are listening who don't know what that is or what it means in my company. So because we're a wholesaler primarily, once we get a purchase agreement from a seller, we have someone in our company whose job is to take that purchase agreement and market it out to a list of buyers, landlords, and flippers, and find folks who are interested in that property. And so he's in charge of that part of the sales. He's kind of a hybrid. He's a little bit sales, but he's really more of a negotiator than a salesperson. So, and he also kind of deals with some very specific, like structural things that he needs to do in terms of the marketing process. So there's a marketing process. He doesn't have a lot of structure when it comes to the negotiating. So he gets a contract for $100,000, just as an example. We have a seller that wants to sell their house. We sign it up for $100,000. He marks it out to our list for $125,000. And then someone calls and says, hey, I'm interested in this property. Tell me something about it. Would you take $115,000? And he's in a negotiation. So that's an unstructured part of it. But the process of getting that property out and presenting it to our buyers, that's a little bit more structured. So he's got a checklist for that part of his business, or that part of his job.
So you touched on something interesting was, as you start to delegate out and hire other people, there's risk that if somebody leaves, it creates a hole in your business that you've got to fill immediately. Going through that experience, have you changed anything of how you structure people's responsibilities or how you look at hiring and filling? Like, did you learn anything and did you change anything from that experience?
We did. In my opinion, depending on the size of your company, there's like a critical mass that you can reach where you have some redundancies and you have the ability to hire people and cross-train them. But there's a point when you're in your hiring process where you simply cannot have two people that are like can jump in and do the other one's job, either because they haven't been trained yet to do the other person's job, or like if someone leaves, like they have a full-time job and they just can't take it over. So as the owner, sometimes you have to jump in. We have done a little bit of both. We've cross-trained some folks who can jump in a short, for a short period of time and take on some other stuff. And we've also hired like redundant people within the same department because we've grown to a point, like, for example, our folks who answer the phone, there's more than one person answering the phone, right? So if someone's sick or they quit, like the one person can handle it. It's a little bit busier for them, but they can handle it until we get the next person in there. Salespeople are a little bit tougher. We do have a couple of salespeople and they can kind of hold down the fort. But honestly, if you ask a sales guy or a sales lady, like, how many leads can you handle? They'll say as many as you can give me. Like, that's almost always the answer, but it's almost never true, right? There's a certain amount of pre-work and follow-up and just drive time and things. Like, there is a certain amount of leads that they can handle responsibly. Like, they can half-ass and call people and like, hey, set appointments and like run and gun and go on the appointment, but not follow up. And to them, they're like handling it. But as the owner, it's like, you're not handling it because all these follow-ups are just sitting there while you're going on new appointments, right? So salespeople are tough. They can cover it for a while, but things start slipping through the cracks if you let it go too long. So you try to like hire to where everyone has a little bit of flex time. If everyone's maxed out at 100%, you have no coverage. If everyone's at like 85 to 95 kind of percent, there's some bleed over. Somebody can jump in for a day and help someone kind of at least keep things from falling apart. So that's kind of what we've done. And I just know the positions that I can't possibly jump in and help them. So I make sure they have more coverage than, like, if my dispo guy gets sick or quits, like, I'm great at that part of my company. Like, I could jump in and we probably would make even a little bit more money potentially, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm okay if that happens. I don't have as much backup for him because I'll be his backup and I'm happy to do it. But like the transaction coordinator, hell no. Like, I got that cross-trained because I don't want any part of it. Like, we even have our title companies. We've used the same one or two for so long. Like, I think I could even lean on them to do a little more than what they necessarily have to do because we're such good customers of theirs. I think I could probably push them to take up some of the slack until I brought someone in. So that's the only thing that scares me in my company is losing my transaction person. And hopefully they're not listening, but like, if they came to me and said, I'm leaving, I need, another $1 an hour or something, I'd be like, fine, I'll give it to you. I don't care. Like, I can't lose that person. So, So anyways, that's kind of how we do it. Cross train, and we make sure everyone isn't at capacity and beyond so that there is some flexibility there.
Gotcha. No, I think that's really interesting. And I think, you touched on something earlier where you said, I can work more hours, I can sleep 4 hours a day. Like, once you start getting 3, 4, 5 people, there's just physically not enough hours in a week.
Yeah.
At some point you're just going to do more. And if you try to overwork, an extra person is always going to do better. And just being able to take stuff off your plate and not focus on it just frees you up to do so many other things. So I think it's
totally
a really good point.
Yeah. And there's opportunity costs here too, right? Like, if you hire that extra person, you can look at it as that's more salary, or that's overhead, whatever you want to look at it as. But the reality is the opportunity cost of missing out on a deal, like, depending on what your style of real estate is, like, it's at least in the tens of thousands that you're losing if you miss a deal, right? So how much is that person really costing you if you miss, let's say you're a house flipper and you miss one deal every 2 months? Like, that's way more than the salary you're paying that person, most likely. So it's a short-term kind of a way of looking at it to say it's costing me too much to have that extra person to relieve everyone's load. If it keeps you from missing deals, it pays for itself 10 times over.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any sort of like benchmark or way you analyze like how much payroll you're carrying? Is it like, do you not want to be above a certain percentage of revenue? Is it like so many hours? Is there, because I know obviously once you start getting into certain things, payroll becomes probably your number one expense.
Yeah.
Is there any way that you look at it to like protect yourself, or that's not as much of a concern?
No, I don't look at it I don't look at payroll in a vacuum like that. Mm-hmm. I look at the overall profitability of my company. And if we're not as profitable as we need to be, and there's like, put it this way, I have bloated my company up to the point that it was very heavy with payroll and it was ridiculous and too many redundancies. And I was trying to use the philosophy like hire for the company you want to be, which is there's some validity to that, but there's a huge danger in that too, right? You can like, oh, I want to be a $10 million company. I'm going to hire 30 people. It's like, no, that's stupid, right? You still have to follow. So I don't look at it in a vacuum like that, but I can tell you the two biggest expenses of my company and probably will be forever are people and marketing. Those are the two by far, and people being the biggest. So people tend to be about 60% of my overall spend. What goes out of my company is typically around 60 to 65% of that is people. And another 20% is marketing, depending on where I'm at with my marketing. So people will always be the biggest. I get that. But I'm also, you have to think about too, like I have a friend of mine who says you can, if you want to be big, you hire for that, right? And you're going to give up some of your profits because you're going to have people, or you can stay small and keep it all, right? I would rather give up half my profits and not have to be in the day-to-day and have some freedom, have my life back and be able to like steer the ship, big picture, than to be in it and keep all the profits, but be working 80 hours a week in the trenches. Like that's just me. Some people go, screw that. I'll be in the trenches for 15 years and then I'll just be on a beach somewhere for the rest of my life. That's fine. I want the lifestyle now, not necessarily just the lifestyle. I want the freedom now, right? I'm not living some extravagant lifestyle, but the freedom is ultra important to me. So I'm a person who might bring on a few more people onto my team at the expense of the top level profit of my company, where you might go, I'll work an extra 10, 15 hours. I'll cover that stuff and just keep a little bit more for me. So it's a little bit of a personal decision. I also have a partner in my company, like a 50-50 partner. So I'm already giving up 50% of my profits theoretically, right? And I have a team. So both of us have that freedom. Now, could the profitability of my company be higher? Absolutely. I could fire everybody and just go myself and go at it myself, but I value the time more than I do the extra profits. So it's kind of a weird non-answer, I think, a little bit, but it's super personal. If you hire to the point that all your profits are gone, but that's part of tracking money, right? I track my profits on a monthly basis, so I know where I am. So if payroll gets too high, we have to somehow push the marketing department or the sales folks. And if they can't get it done, we're going to reduce our headcount. Like we just are. Like I'm not going to be not profitable. I'm too small a company to carry some sort of a, loss month over month. That's not going to happen.
No, I hear you. I think that's a really good explanation because, I think I would have been, I don't want to say unhappy, but I think I would have been less pleased to hear than what you said. If you'd say like, oh no, if it's over 65%, like we're way too high, which, goes back to what you said. If you're carrying a loss, it's obviously too high of a percentage.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting to hear your relationship between hiring people and, being in your business. When you first, because you talked about going away, going on a beach, whatever. That first time that you kind of stepped away for a vacation and took time off, what was that like? Did you make it super short because you were nervous, or did you just like say,
dude,
screw it, we're going to take a week? Did you wait before you did it? Like, what was that like?
Probably one of my strengths is certainly one of my weaknesses, right? Not to sound like Michael Scott, like my weakness is I care too much, but I am very quick to trust and to release control of my business. I'm not a control freak necessarily in my company. I'm very quick to release control to someone I think that can handle it. So I sleep like a baby when I'm on vacation. Like I almost get aggravated if I do see an email or someone calls me for something. Like I just deal with it. Like just do it, right? You're not stupid. You've been around for a while. You can do this. Like even if you mess it up, like it's fixed. Everything is mostly fixable. And I don't think the people in my company are pretty good. Even way back when, I was pretty comfortable with it. Now, I will say this in all fairness, I have a partner, like I said. So my partner and I rarely took a vacation at the same time. Mm-hmm. That being said, if I didn't have a partner, I probably would have been just as comfortable because I just don't sweat. Like I don't stress out about like my business. It's not that I don't care. I do care. But some people like worry like crazy, like they can't compartmentalize and everything is just always weighing on them. I'm not like that. If my business is sort of like careening out of control and it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm sitting there with my family, like I can just put that in a box, put the lid on it, and I can deal with what's happening in front of me and have a good time and be great. When I wake up in the morning, I take the lid off and I deal with the problem. Like I'm really good at compartmentalizing, almost like creepy good. Like it's like there's something wrong with me that I can shut out like when the sky is falling on my company. If it's midnight and I can't do anything about it, I'm turning it off.
I resonate with that because there are people that, it's 1 o'clock in the morning and they're losing sleep. You physically can't do anything at that point in time. I thought, what's mandatory is easy, right? If you have no control over it and you try and control it, you're going to drive yourself into, you're going to kill yourself because there's only so much you can do, right? If you have something going on and listen, there's business hours and I work 24/7. I understand all of that. But at the same time, there's only so much you could accomplish at that point in time. And to let that stress you out is just going to give you, it's going to kill you. So I understand that. I could be like that. My partner's the complete opposite. He'll stay in the office staring at a spreadsheet for 3 days. Yeah. And I'm like, did it change? Did the formula change itself? Like, go home, take a break, come back, and we'll figure it out. But you have to be able to do that. It's easier. And also from taking the situation that might be an absolute shit show, putting it off to the side and forgetting about it per se, it might make your mind more clear when you go open that problem back up and say, okay, now let's look at this from the top down. So I get that. It's extremely hard for people to do, but I'm the same way. I'm not going to let something ruin my day if I can't control it. I'll try and fix it, but if it's like you said, after hours or later or even if it's midday on a Sunday, right? You do what you have to do, but at the same time, if you can't control it, it's got to correct itself.
Totally. And I think that's a good skill to try to get if you're an entrepreneur. You can't, like you say, you can't drive yourself crazy. The only thing, like I will be honest, like one of my weaknesses though, is like if you screw me over, like if you F me over somehow, like that'll eat at me all night long. Like I'll be pissed about it. But if my company's in the middle of a job that's just going south or we're going to lose money, like I'm not going to do anything at midnight. I'm going to bed and I'll sleep like a baby. Like I won't even think about it until the morning. So yeah, I hear you, man. I think it's a good thing to be able to compartmentalize. My wife, it freaks my wife out. Like she was in the business with me for a while and we were flipping houses. But at some point, like the stress and the ups and downs and all the shit that happens when you're dealing with contractors and stuff, like at some point she's just like, no mas, like I cannot live with all of this like roller coaster emotions. I gotta tap out. And she's like, you do your thing. Like, you're awesome. You do it. And I ramped it up after that. Like the stress got higher because I don't care. It doesn't stress me out. So once I like plucked her out of the equation and I wasn't protecting her stress level, like I doubled down. She can't even believe it. I don't even tell her 90% of the stuff that goes on, not because it's all bad. Even good things stress her out a little bit. Right. So I just like, we don't really talk about it that much. She's totally down. Like if I want to talk about it, she'll talk to me all day long, but I don't bother telling her like, we got to, property in the market. We owe the money back, $500,000. It's due back in a week. And the deal just fell through, like the buyer backed out. Like she can't deal with that kind of stuff, but I just go, all right, let's do this. Like, let's game on. Like I almost get invigorated by shit going wrong because it sort of makes me feel like I'm like figuring stuff out. I don't know. I like problem solving that way.
I hear that. I'm 100% on the same page. Like that to me, like, if everything goes 100% according to plan, listen, it's fun, it's easy, but there's no fun in that, right? Like figuring out issues is entertaining. Like that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. It's a chess match for me. Like I'm not a big chess player, but I mean, I can imagine if someone's playing, like I get it, right? Like like someone makes a great move and you're like, shit, I didn't see that. Okay. All right. There's gotta be something here. And I just like looking down at that chessboard and figuring out what my next move is. It's fun for me.
Yeah. So I know you work with a lot of people and I know you also talk to a lot of successful people. I know we touched on a little bit with yourself personally, but is there like a common theme that you see through people that are, either not doing well or have plateaued or are stuck that you think would be helpful and tangible for someone listening to take away?
It's hard because here's the thing, guys. This isn't my answer, but I'm going to say this because it's been a revelation I've had recently.
Sure.
The phrase, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for the rest of life. I really believe that most people need to be taught to fish, but almost everybody wants to be given a fish, right? So when I answer this question, something tangible, most people hear that as like an app or a strategy or some sort of a magic bullet that I can do that will change my business. The fact of the matter is the most successful people that I see, it's not intelligence, because I've met some real smart people that are real estate investors and I've met some dopey people that are real estate investors, right? From just pure intelligence. But what I do see that's common among all of them is two things. I used to say it was one thing, but it's really probably two. Number one, they execute. They don't sit around and gather data forever. They execute on stuff. And two, they don't make excuses. Like they just don't blame other people for shit that happens or doesn't happen in their business or in their life. So it's really more about taking action. I swear to God, the person who spends a month trying to understand their lane in real estate, whether it's flipping, wholesaling, buying whole apartments, whatever it is, they spend a month hardcore like learning, and then they just go out and start executing on what they've learned, will always beat the person who spends a year learning and then goes out. Like they'll always be ahead of them because the people who take action are always the people who succeed. Here's the thing. I probably left, I'll bet you I left $10,000 on the table in my first deal. I made 15. I probably left 10 on the table through not negotiating the cost of the house well enough, through my contractor not paying the subcontractors and me having to double pay the subcontractors because he didn't pay and he disappeared, through not understanding how to market and position my property as good as I could have when it went on the MLS. Like all those things, I made all those mistakes. I still went $15,000. And that just started me because I did 3 properties next and just ramped up from there. All of that time I would have taken to like learn more over the next year wouldn't have really probably helped me. I probably would have still made those same mistakes, right? So it's about execution. It's about not blaming other people. There's a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Freaking great book. Like I was telling my wife last night, everyone should at least be forced to listen to the abridged version of that book. Because if everyone just started saying, F it isn't my parents, it's not the economy, it's not the president, it's not my job, it's not my boss, not my wife, not my husband, it's not where I live, it's not where I grew up or the color of my skin, it's me. I'm the reason I'm not where I want to be. That would change things for everybody. That would be the number one thing.
Mm-hmm. I could not. I'd kiss you if you were with me right now because I say it all the time, right? Like typically when something goes wrong, I'll say, "Hey, listen, it's my fault." Like I'll blame myself because it makes for the conversation to go easier, right? You don't have that pissing match with, "Oh, you did this, I did that." Like right. It's irrelevant. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I tell this all people all the time, like when people say, "Oh, I'm sorry," oh, that's great, but don't do it again or don't make that mistake because I appreciate it. It's the right thing to do, but just don't make a mistake again, or admit if you say you're sorry over and over again, and it's not doing anything. So I totally get that because there is no such thing as accountability. Nobody wants to admit. Everybody points the finger at somebody else as opposed to just say, fuck it. Now what I do, which is a problem, I ask people to do things. If they don't do them, I just do it myself as opposed to making someone accountable. Yeah. But you only can make someone as accountable as they want to be.
All right. I would kiss you right back now. If I were there, I'd kiss you right back. Here's the thing. In my company, literally, we have a set of values that we like talk about in our company. But one of the things in my company that I repeat over and over again is no apologies. I don't want people to apologize. As a matter of fact, I forbid them to apologize because apologies only make the person apologizing feel better because the person who's being apologized to feels a little shittier after the apology, right? So don't apologize because it makes me feel worse. It makes you feel better. Let's just fix the problem. Let's talk about why it happened and don't do it again. So like my assistant is bad about this. I love her, but she'll do something and she'll go, I'm really sorry. Oh, I'm not supposed to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to say I'm sorry. I was like, oh, just don't do it, man. It makes me feel bad. So no apologies is a total rule in my company.
It doesn't, let's fix it. Let's address what happened. And hey, listen, I'll take the blame too. If you made a mistake, I probably didn't explain something or do something. So it's a two-way street. But the bigger question is, okay, what can we do to not make that one again? And how can we work to a common solution? So I think that's super important. And everyone should take that to heart because at the end of the day, apologizing ain't going to fix it, right? That's just a stepping stone to nothing. Let's just fix it.
Going down that road, though, one thing that happens, and I've noticed this, and this is something they talk about in the book of Extreme Ownership, is what happens in your company when you start taking ownership for things that maybe people did wrong, that worked for you, right? Like, no. I didn't. I should have explained that better. I should have. Like, if you start taking responsibility for their mistakes, you'll be surprised at how much people will go, no, that was on me. I did that. I'll fix. Like, people appreciate that you're willing to take responsibility, and it makes them feel obligated to claim back responsibility for that. And so you create this culture in your company of people saying, no, I could have done something different. Like, that's on me, right? It's like this peer pressure that's positive. People want to take accountability when they see you're not going to dump on them every time. they don't want you to take responsibility. Like, you didn't do it. And if you do something wrong and I go, that was me, like, if you're a halfway decent person, something inside of you goes, I can't let him take responsibility. That was not me. Where you might have sat there quietly. If everyone's like, who did this? I'm going to have to kill that person. Like, you might just sit there and go, I don't want to take responsibility. But when people start taking it for you, it's like this, you have this need to like not let them take that abuse because it was your fault. So it kind of creates a culture inside your company too.
I agree.
Yeah, I think you brought up an interesting point that ties back to our last episode on your first deal where you left money on the table. We were talking with Scott about, getting into a new market or a new asset, and that, you're going to pay a premium or pay market to kind of get in there. But that first deal is going to lead to so many more deals in the future.
Yep.
And there's a big thing when I talk to people who are trying to figure out when they're getting started, what should I do, right? Should I do wholesaling, flipping, multifamily, land, tax deeds, etc.? I said, just try one, because the time it takes you to figure it out, if you take a month and then you start, or you take 6 months and then you start, it's still going to take you however long going through trying that way to figure it out. So if it's going to take you 6 months worth of trying tax deeds, if you start after a month, or if you start after 6 months, there's still another 6 months for you to figure it out. It's just now, if you wait another 5 months to get started, you're going to figure it out 5 months later. And it's going to take you an extra 5 months to figure out what you should be doing or what better suits you. So I think it's the same thing of like, okay, just understand that, hey, when I get started, there's going to be stuff I'm not going to know, or there's going to be stuff I'm going to get wrong, and I'm not going to buy the best deal in the world. But just understanding that, hey, this first deal, or, the first day that I get started, it's that much quicker to getting to your end goals than if you just waited to continue to try to learn, educate, or analyze.
Totally. Just start, man. Just start. Like, stop. Like, I talk to so many people. I can tell a lot of times when I start talking to someone about real estate who is not in real estate, but they want to be, and they go, well, what should I do? Like, what do you think? And like you said, like, just pick something and like, just go, like, just start now, because in 6 months from now, you're no farther ahead if you don't start. And they'll be like, yeah, but like, the election's coming up, so I'm going to wait. It's like, dude, well, then like Christmas is right around the corner. Like, maybe I'll start like fresh first of the year. It's like, I already know that person's an excuse maker. Like, they're probably never going to start, right? But like, just getting started is half of the battle. Getting off the starting blocks, getting your ass off the couch, getting off the sidelines, whatever analogy you want to use, like, that is one of the hardest things you can do, right? You can't change, like, to your point, Chris, you can't change directions in a car. Like, a car that's parked cannot change directions. It has to have some forward movement. Once you have forward movement, you can steer it. You can go in a different direction if something isn't working. But a parked car, man, just sits there, and you're a parked car until you get started. So I couldn't agree more. Just get started. You don't need to know everything. Matter of fact, you'll never know everything, and you're going to make mistakes anyways. Just get started.
Yeah. I mean, John says a lot, that first deal, you'll lose money even on it. You're going to learn way more than you ever would by trying to analyze 50 deals without actually doing it. So I agree 100%. But I think that's an awesome place to wrap up. I think this was a really awesome episode. I think I definitely picked up a few things. I'm sure anybody listening did as well. So, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about you, follow along, where can they do all that good stuff?
You can go to mikesimmons.com. You can also check out my podcast, Just Start Real Estate, on wherever you listen to podcasts. And if they're interested, I just wrote a book called Level Jumping. You can go on Amazon and grab that book. Let me know what you think. Give it a rating review. And that's it, man. Just reach out if you need anything.
Beautiful. Guys, definitely go check it out. We'll have everything in the show notes, but definitely go check out everything, or at least one of those things, and get in touch with them and follow them. And thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you're not already subscribed, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you are, please send it to someone that would get a tremendous amount of value from this episode. I think they really will. So make sure you send it to someone. Mike, once again, thanks for coming on, bud.